Under pressure, most people speak too much. They explain, they justify, they fight to be understood, believing that clarity equals victory. But that belief is what keeps them trapped. Because in the theater of power, the one who talks less controls more. Not because they're passive, but because they force others to reveal themselves fully before ever revealing their own position. This is the Machiavellian mastery most never discover. Silence isn't submission. It's surveillance. And in the art of argument, the most dominant figure isn't the loudest. It's the one who speaks so little that others start doing their work for them. The average person enters a disagreement thinking they must outlogic, outspeak, or outmaneuver the opposition. But the high-level operator knows the longer you let someone talk, the more likely they are to overextend, contradict themselves, and expose the truth they're trying to hide. Think about the last heated argument you witnessed. Who looked more powerful? The person screaming their points, gesticulating wildly, repeating themselves with increasing desperation, or the person who sat back, listened, and delivered one devastating line that ended everything? The answer is obvious, yet most people still choose the path of noise over the path of precision. This isn't about being passive-aggressive or manipulative in the petty sense. This is about understanding a fundamental truth of human psychology. People reveal more when they feel unheard than when they feel understood. They expose their weaknesses when they're trying to prove their strength. They show their cards when they think you're not paying attention. Today, you're going to learn the 9 strategic secrets that will transform how you handle every conflict, negotiation, and power struggle for the rest of your life. These aren't just debate tactics. They're psychological weapons that work because they tap into the deepest insecurities and behavioral patterns that drive human interaction. Secret 1. Say less. Listen like you're loading a weapon. That's the first move in this masterclass. Say less, but listen like you're loading a weapon. You don't nod enthusiastically. You don't rush to respond. You don't fill awkward pauses with nervous laughter or agreement. You hold the silence, even when it grows uncomfortable, even when every instinct screams at you to speak. And in that stillness, something magical happens. The other person begins to fill the gap. They'll repeat themselves, thinking you didn't hear. They'll drift off their main point, adding unnecessary details. They'll offer justifications you didn't ask for, explanations for motivations you never questioned. Why does this happen? Because the human mind hates a vacuum. It needs to fill silence with noise, emptiness with content, mystery with revelation. When you refuse to give them the conversational tennis match they expect, they start playing against themselves. You become the black mirror in the room, reflecting nothing but absorbing everything. While they believe they're convincing you, building their case, winning you over, they're actually giving you every tool you need to dismantle them quietly and completely. Here's what this looks like in practice. Someone accuses you of being unreliable. The amateur immediately launches into a defense. That's not true. Remember when I helped you move? What about the time I covered your shift? But the strategist? They lean back slightly, maintain eye contact, and say nothing. The silence stretches. The accuser, uncomfortable, begins to elaborate. I mean, you were late to that meeting last week, and you forgot to call me back on Tuesday, and... Now they're building your defense for you. They're showing that their accusation of chronic unreliability is based on 2 minor incidents. They're revealing that this isn't really about reliability. It's about their need for constant attention and validation, all because you refuse to take the bait. This technique works because it forces people to confront the weakness of their own position. When someone makes an accusation and you immediately defend, you validate the accusation as worthy of defense. But when you simply listen, they have to keep talking to justify why they brought it up in the first place. And the more they talk, the more they reveal how little substance there actually is behind their attack. The key is to listen with purpose. You're not just staying quiet, you're gathering intelligence. Every word they speak is data about their emotional state, their real motivations, their pressure points, their fears. You're loading a weapon, and they're handing you the ammunition. Secret 2. Ask questions that dismantle, not defend. The second technique is more dangerous and far more effective. Ask questions that dismantle, not defend. Most people argue by counterattacking. You said X. Let me tell you why you're wrong. You accuse me of Y. Let me explain my side. This is the path of the amateur, and it leads nowhere but deeper into conflict. But explanation is a trap. The moment you start explaining, you're fighting on their terms. You're reacting to their frame, their timeline, their version of events. You're in defense mode, and defense is always weaker than offense. Reaction is submission, disguised as resistance. Instead, you pivot. You don't respond to their accusations. You ask them to explain theirs. But not just any questions. Strategic questions. Questions that sound innocent but are actually surgical strikes at the foundation of their argument. What makes you say that? This forces them to reveal their evidence, which is often weaker than their confidence suggested. And you're certain that's true? This plants doubt while maintaining your composure. What are you basing that on? This demands specificity from someone who was probably speaking in generalities. Do you feel that's the only possible way to see it? This opens the door for them to admit uncertainty while positioning you as reasonable. Help me understand your thinking here. This sounds collaborative, but actually puts them in the position of having to justify their logic to you. Simple, calm, unshakable. These questions don't ignite more conflict. They quietly reposition the burden of proof. Suddenly, they're the ones justifying, backtracking, scrambling to sound certain when they're not. They begin exposing the shaky foundation beneath their own argument. You haven't even stated your side yet, but you've already created imbalance. Now they're off-center, emotionally invested, speaking faster. And the faster someone talks, the more they slip. The more they slip, the more they reveal. The more they reveal, the more power you accumulate. Here's a real-world example. Your boss criticizes your project approach in front of the team. The amateur gets defensive. But I followed the guidelines. This is how we've always done it. The strategist asks, what specifically would you like to see done differently? Now the boss has to provide constructive feedback instead of just criticism. If they can't, they look incompetent. If they can, you look collaborative and open to improvement. Either way, you've shifted from defense to control. You don't fight noise with noise. You use noise to collapse itself. Every question you ask forces them to think harder, speak more carefully, and reveal more about their true position. Meanwhile, you remain mysterious, composed, and increasingly powerful. Secret 3. Mirror their energy, not their content. The third maneuver is psychological. Mirror their energy, but not their content. This isn't about parroting their words or matching their volume. It's about showing enough calm attention that they continue to pour themselves out while you remain in complete control of your own emotional state. You respond with minimal agreement cues, a slight head tilt that shows you're processing, a quiet that encourages them to continue, a calm I see that neither agrees nor disagrees but keeps them talking. No resistance, no escalation, no interruption, just open space and reflection. This technique is devastatingly effective because it exploits a fundamental human need, the need to be heard and understood. When people feel like they're being listened to, they become more comfortable, more open, more willing to share things they probably shouldn't share. The longer they see no visible enemy, the more comfortable they become. And comfort makes them reckless. They might start insulting you, thinking you're too passive to respond. They might reveal emotional baggage that has nothing to do with the current situation. They might take the argument too far, saying something they can't take back, crossing a line that damages their credibility permanently. And you still haven't lifted your weapon. You've only let them swing until they fall from their own momentum. Here's what this looks like. Someone is angry about a decision you made. They start explaining why it was wrong, why you should have consulted them, why they're frustrated. The amateur either gets defensive or tries to calm them down. The strategist mirrors their energy level. If they're intense, you're focused. If they're passionate, you're attentive. But you don't mirror their emotion. You remain centered while giving them space to escalate. As they continue, they reveal more than they intended. This is just like when Sarah made that decision without asking anyone, and we all know how that turned out. And frankly, I'm tired of being treated like my opinion doesn't matter around here. I've been doing this job longer than most people, and I think I deserve some respect. Now you know this isn't really about your decision. It's about their feeling undervalued, their comparison to Sarah, their need for recognition. You have the real information while they think they're just venting about your choice. This is why silence, when used properly, is not just tactical, it's surgical. And if used with emotional discipline, it becomes your dominance signal. People begin to associate your calm presence with depth, wisdom, and hidden power. They start wondering what you're thinking, what you know, what you're planning. The key is maintaining that energy mirror without losing yourself in their emotional storm. You're present but not absorbed, engaged but not entangled, responsive but not reactive. Secret 4. Detach your ego from the outcome. But this restraint only works if you can master the fourth principle. Detach your ego from the outcome. This is where most people fail, even when they understand the previous techniques intellectually. They can stay quiet, they can ask good questions, they can mirror energy, but they can't let go of needing to win, to be right, to be understood, to be validated. The average person argues to win. They want the other person to admit they were wrong, to apologize, to change their mind, to acknowledge their superior logic or moral position. But the Machiavellian mind argues to extract, not approval, not applause, not even agreement, just leverage. You don't care if they believe you. You don't care if they get it. You don't care if they walk away thinking they won. You care about what they reveal in trying to convince you they're right. Every word they throw is a confession about what they fear, what they need you to believe, what image they're desperate to preserve, and what emotion they cannot control. You're not there to be understood. You're there to watch them unravel trying to understand you. This detachment is liberating in ways most people never experience. When you're not invested in being right, you can't be made wrong. When you're not trying to win, you can't lose. When you're not defending a position, you can't be attacked. You become like water, formless, adaptable, impossible to grasp or defeat. But this doesn't mean you don't have goals. Your goal is information. Your goal is psychological positioning. Your goal is long-term influence and respect. These are far more valuable than winning any single argument. Think about it. Would you rather win an argument and have someone resent you, or lose an argument and have someone respect your composure and depth? Would you rather be right and create an enemy, or be strategic and create an ally who thinks they convinced you of something? The person who needs to win every argument is actually weak. They're dependent on external validation, on others' agreement, on being seen as smart or right or superior. The person who can lose arguments while gaining respect, information, and influence, that's real power. This detachment also allows you to see opportunities that ego-driven people miss. When you're not busy defending your position, you can notice when the other person makes a good point that you can incorporate. You can find common ground that moves the conversation forward. You can identify win-win solutions that make everyone look good. Secret 5. Strike when they've overextended. And when the moment finally comes, when their argument has stretched too far, cracked too wide, when they've revealed more than they intended and contradicted themselves in ways they don't even realize, you lean in and deliver one quiet sentence. Not a rebuttal, not a monologue, just a single decisive line that lands like a knife in the silence they created. Interesting. I think you just made my point for me. That's exactly what I was waiting to hear. So you're admitting this all comes from your insecurity? Thanks. I was wondering how far you'd go to avoid the truth. I appreciate you being so honest about your real motivations. No shouting, no performance, no emotional escalation. Just calm precision, landing a strike they didn't see coming in a fight they thought they were winning. The power of this moment cannot be overstated. You've been silent, absorbing, questioning, mirroring, and they've been talking, explaining, justifying, revealing. They think they've been building a case against you, but you've been building a case with their own words. When you finally speak, it's not to argue with them, it's to show them what they've actually said. This technique works because it uses their own momentum against them. In martial arts, this is called redirecting force. Instead of meeting their attack head-on, you step aside and use their energy to throw them off balance. In psychological terms, you're taking their words and showing them the logical conclusion they didn't see coming. Here's the crucial part. Timing. You don't strike early when they're still building steam. You don't strike late when they've already exhausted themselves. You strike at the moment of maximum overextension, when they've said something that contradicts their earlier position, when they've revealed a motivation that undermines their stated concern, when they've made a claim they can't support. And once that moment lands, the dynamic shifts forever. You've shown you don't need to overpower them. You just need to let them talk long enough to defeat themselves. You've demonstrated that your silence wasn't weakness or confusion. It was strategy. You've proven that you were never out of control of the situation, even when it looked like they were dominating the conversation. The psychological impact is profound. They realize they've been playing checkers while you were playing chess. They understand that your questions weren't innocent. They were guided. They see that your silence wasn't passive. It was active and purposeful. From that moment forward, they'll approach you differently. They'll be more careful with their words, more respectful of your presence, more aware that underestimating you is dangerous. Secret 6. Let them reach emotional peak before you speak. Here's the next silent weapon. Let them reach emotional peak before you speak. This requires patience and emotional discipline that most people simply don't possess, but it's devastatingly effective when executed properly. It's predictable how this unfolds. They start calm. They lay out their stance. They expect the usual conversational back and forth. You give none. So they push harder, thinking you didn't understand or didn't hear. Their voice gets louder. Their gestures become more animated. Their logic gets weaker as their emotion gets stronger. Their composure begins to crack. Why does this happen? Because no resistance creates internal panic. The average person is so used to conversational friction, agreement, disagreement, questions, pushback, anything, that when it disappears completely, they feel unmoored. They begin imagining how their argument must be landing. They assume your silence means judgment, disapproval, or hidden power. And that assumption does more damage than any response could. You're not just staying silent. You're forcing them to imagine the worst-case scenario, that you've already figured them out, that you're just waiting for them to finish embarrassing themselves, that they're losing badly and don't even know it. Now they're no longer arguing against you. They're arguing against what they fear you're thinking. They're fighting shadows, battling their own insecurities, trying to convince someone who hasn't even engaged yet. This is where the psychological pressure becomes almost unbearable for them. They start making mistakes. They repeat themselves. They bring up irrelevant points. They get personal. They say things they'll regret later. All while you sit there, calm and observant, gathering more and more ammunition. When they hit their emotional peak, when they've thrown every dart they have, when they're red-faced and breathing hard, when they've exhausted their arguments and started repeating themselves, that's when you speak. And when you do, you don't match their emotion. You speak slowly. You speak low. You speak like you're not invested at all, like you're pointing out a minor observation from a great distance. You seem really upset about this. I can see this means a lot to you. You've put a lot of thought into this. That mismatch in tone creates psychological dissonance that's almost unbearable. They're flooded with adrenaline. You're composed. They're spiraling. You're still. They're loud. You're quiet. And in that contrast, one thing becomes undeniable. You're in control. Even if they made good points, even if they won logically, it doesn't matter because arguments are rarely about facts. They're about frame. And the frame now belongs to the one who kept their power while the other lost composure. This technique also reveals something crucial about the other person's character. How someone behaves when they think they're not getting through to you tells you everything about how they handle frustration, pressure, and perceived rejection. Do they get louder? Do they get personal? Do they make threats? Do they storm off? This information is invaluable for future interactions. Secret 7. Use their own words to end the argument. When you do speak, make it surgical. You don't bring new information. You bring theirs. You don't introduce fresh arguments. You highlight the contradictions in what they've already said. This is perhaps the most devastating technique because it's impossible to argue against. You said a moment ago that you weren't upset. Then why raise your voice? Earlier you claimed it wasn't personal, but now you've mentioned my character 3 times. You said you just wanted clarity, but you've interrupted me every time I've tried to speak. You told me this was about the project, but you've spent most of your time talking about Sarah. You said you were open to discussion, but you've dismissed every question I've asked. You're not arguing, you're simply holding up a mirror. And when someone is forced to confront their own contradictions, not through accusation but through playback, they lose ground fast. They can't say you're twisting anything. They can't say you misunderstood. They said it. You heard it. Now they have to explain themselves to themselves. This technique is so effective because it bypasses their defenses completely. They came prepared to argue against your position, but they didn't come prepared to argue against their own words. They expected you to attack their logic, but instead you're showing them their illogic. They thought they were building a case, but you're revealing they were building a contradiction. The beauty of this approach is that it's completely factual and impossible to dispute. You're not interpreting their words or adding your own spin. You're simply repeating what they said and pointing out the inconsistency. They have to either admit the contradiction or try to explain it away, and either response weakens their position. This is also where your earlier silence pays dividends. Because you've been listening carefully and speaking little, you remember exactly what they said and when they said it. Meanwhile, they've been talking so much they've lost track of their own narrative. You have perfect recall of their contradictions while they're struggling to remember what they said 5 minutes ago. The psychological impact is devastating. They realize you've been paying attention to everything while they were just reacting emotionally. They understand that your silence wasn't confusion. It was preparation. They see that you've been building a case with their own words, while they thought they were building a case against you. Secret 8. Master the strategic withdrawal. Once they begin to spiral or wear themselves out, you do something few have the discipline to do. You step back further. You don't refute. You don't conclude. You don't try to win. You simply close the conversation with finality. You've said a lot. I don't think there's more to add. Let's leave it there. Sounds like this isn't about finding a solution. I think we see this differently. I'm going to let you think about what you've said. You don't escalate. You don't appease. You don't try to smooth things over or find middle ground. You dismiss with finality, a tone that suggests not anger, but disinterest. And that's what hits hardest. Not that you disagreed with them, not that you insulted them, but that you stopped seeing the conversation as worth your energy. This triggers a deep psychological wound in anyone who's been arguing to gain control. They realize they've lost, not to a counterattack, but to your indifference. Not to superior logic, but to superior composure. Not to a better argument, but to no argument at all. The strategic withdrawal works because it denies them the satisfaction of resolution. They came for a fight, and you gave them a monologue. They wanted engagement, and you gave them dismissal. They needed you to care about winning, and you showed them you didn't need to win at all. This is where silence becomes haunting. You've created a void, and they will try to fill it. In their mind, in future conversations, in how they treat you next time. They'll replay the interaction obsessively, trying to figure out what just happened, why they feel so unsatisfied, what they should have said differently. The genius of this move is that they'll keep thinking about it long after you've moved on. They'll rewrite the ending in their head. They'll come up with better arguments. They'll imagine what they should have said. But none of that matters because the moment has passed, and you've already established the dynamic. This isn't just argument strategy. This is behavioral conditioning. You've trained them, without saying it directly, that when they escalate, they lose access, not to your affection, not to your approval, but to your attention. And attention, when given sparingly, becomes the currency of control. Secret 9. Never explain yourself afterward. Here's the final principle that separates the strategist from the amateur. After the argument, never explain yourself. Let the aftermath speak for you. This is where most people break character and undo all their good work. They win the moment. They maintain composure throughout the interaction. They execute the techniques perfectly. And then later, through guilt, anxiety, or social pressure, they reach out. They clarify their intentions. They soften their position. They seek peace and understanding. I hope you know I wasn't trying to be difficult earlier. I just want to make sure we're okay. Maybe I came across wrong, but what I meant was, but when you explain your silence after it's already done its damage, you dilute it. You give back the power you earned. And worst of all, you teach people that your quiet control was just a temporary act, not your baseline standard. Machiavellian silence isn't a technique. It's a reputation. It's what they whisper about after you leave. It's what makes them hesitate before confronting you next time. It's what forces them to second-guess themselves before raising their voice in your direction again. The goal isn't just to win one argument. It's to make people feel that arguing with you is never worth it again. Because your silence isn't passive. It's predictive. They begin to associate your quiet with inevitability, your calm with hidden power, your restraint with superior strategy. They'll say things like, "When he goes quiet, it's already over." She doesn't argue. She lets people destroy themselves. By the time I realized what was happening, he had already won. You don't want to get into it with her. She'll make you look foolish without saying a word. That's how dominance becomes invisible, not by display, but by pattern. Not by force, but by reputation. Not by winning arguments, but by making arguments unnecessary. You become the psychological mirror that doesn't distort. They see themselves in you, and what they see, if they're unstable, will make them uncomfortable. That discomfort becomes self-regulation, not because you taught them, but because you made it too risky to cross your threshold again. The deeper psychology. Why this works. Understanding why these techniques work is crucial to using them effectively. At the deepest level, they exploit fundamental aspects of human psychology that most people don't even realize they possess. First, there's the need for validation. Most people argue not to find truth, but to be validated. They want to be seen as smart, right, reasonable, or justified. When you refuse to give them that validation through agreement or even disagreement, they become increasingly desperate to earn it. This desperation makes them reveal more than they intended. Second, there's the discomfort with ambiguity. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures who need to categorize and understand their environment. When you remain mysterious and unreadable, you create cognitive dissonance that's deeply uncomfortable. They'll project onto you, assume your thoughts, and react to their own projections rather than to you. Third, there's the power of social proof. When you remain calm while others become emotional, observers automatically assign you higher status. Even if no one else is present, the other person feels this dynamic and begins to see themselves as the less composed, less controlled party. Fourth, there's the principle of scarcity. When your words are rare, they become valuable. When your approval is hard to earn, it becomes precious. When your attention is selective, it becomes a prize worth competing for. These psychological principles work regardless of the specific content of any argument. They're based on how humans process social interactions at the most fundamental level. From this point forward, when people try to bait you, let them talk. When they try to control the narrative, let them talk. When they try to twist your actions, doubt your motives, question your calm, let them talk. Because the more they speak, the more they expose. And the less you speak, the more you become unreadable, untouchable, unforgettable. The argument ends, but the echo of your silence remains. And in that echo, they'll hear one thing loud and clear. You don't need to win arguments because you've already won something far more valuable. Their respect, their caution, and their understanding that crossing you isn't worth the cost. This isn't about becoming cold or manipulative. It's about becoming powerful in the truest sense, so secure in yourself that you don't need others' validation, so confident in your position that you don't need to defend it constantly, so comfortable with conflict that you can navigate it without losing your center. When you master these 9 secrets, you don't just win arguments, you transcend them. You become the kind of person others think twice before challenging, not because they fear your anger, but because they respect your depth. Not because you're intimidating, but because you're unshakable. That's how you win every conflict before it even starts. Not by preparing better arguments, but by becoming the kind of person who doesn't need to argue at all. The power is in the silence. The victory is in the restraint. The dominance is in the discipline to let others defeat themselves while you remain untouched, unmoved, and ultimately unforgettable.